Did you know that hundreds of successful people have shared their stories in books, explaining exactly how they achieved success, yet so many people don't read them? How do you explain that? One book could save you 5 years of trial and error. Every successful person I know from all over the world is a good reader. Their curiosity pushes them to keep reading. They're always eager to learn. They just read, and read some more. Now let's talk about how to do it. How to build a reading habit that leads not just to knowledge, but to legacy, to freedom, and yes, to wealth. You know, someone once said, if you want to hide something valuable, put it in a book because most people won't look there. That may sound a bit harsh, but the truth often is. The great secret of wealth and success is hidden in plain sight, written on paper, wrapped between two covers, sold for $10 or less. And yet, so few take the time to read. Most are looking for secrets and shortcuts, but wealth rarely lives there. It lives in discipline, it lives in ideas, it lives in action, and the habit of daily reading is how you bring all three together. Now let me tell you how it started for me. I was broke, frustrated, and confused. But I heard a man say, "You are the average of the books you read and the people you meet." That hit me. I had been listening to the wrong people, and I hadn't read anything worthwhile in years, so I decided, let me start with just one book. I picked up a book on goal setting and read for 30 minutes a day. Not long, just enough to feed the mind. And within a week, my thoughts started changing. Within a month, my confidence grew. Within a year, my income followed. Because wealth begins with how you think, and reading gives you better thoughts to think. To build this habit, you don't need to start with hours. You start with a commitment. 30 minutes a day. That's it. Maybe it's after your morning coffee, or right before you go to bed. Maybe it's while you commute. If the eyes can't read, the ears can listen. The key is consistency. Make it the same time every day until your mind starts expecting it. And don't just read passively read with a pen in hand. Keep a notebook beside you. Underline powerful thoughts. Highlight key principles. And for every reading session, write down 3 actionable takeaways. Not 20, just 3. You're not reading for information alone. You're reading to transform your financial thinking. When you do this for a week, you'll gain a few good ideas. When you do it for a month, you'll start feeling a little different. But when you do it for a year, that notebook will become your treasure chest. Inside it, the ideas, the insights, and the strategies that could have taken you a decade to learn through trial and error, and those ideas will start turning into habits. And those habits will turn into income, and that income, if stewarded wisely, will start turning into wealth. That's how it works. So every morning or evening, you meet the page. Not because someone tells you to, but because you understand something deeper now. If you change what you know, you change what you do. And if you change what you do long enough, you change where you end up. That's how wealth begins, with 30 minutes a day and the discipline to keep turning the page. When I was young and broke, I learned a painful truth. The mind, left untended, becomes poor long before the bank account does. And I realized that I had been spending money on everything except the one thing that would change everything myself. That day, I made a decision to treat my mind like an investment account. Not just hope to get smarter, wealthier, or better, but to plan for it monthly, deliberately, like a bill I paid to my future. So I started small. $20 a month. That was my budget. Not for entertainment, not for clothes, not for food, but for knowledge, a book, a course, a seminar, something any that would stretch me just a little bit further than I was yesterday. And you know what? It didn't feel like much in the beginning. Just a book here, a workshop there. But month after month, I could feel the difference. My conversation started to change. My vocabulary shifted. My ideas got sharper. And eventually, my results caught up. You see, people understand investing when it comes to money. They'll talk about compound interest, long-term returns, and how small amounts can grow into something big. But they miss the greatest form of compound interest, the interest that pays you in wisdom, in discipline, in opportunity. That's what happens when you invest in your knowledge. One idea can change your income forever. One shift in your mindset can unlock wealth you were blind to for years. And it often starts with something as simple as a book or a class that opens your eyes. So, the strategy is this: create a knowledge investment plan. Every month, set aside a small amount. Maybe it's $20, maybe $50. If you've got more, invest more. But the key isn't the size, it's the consistency. Treat it like a non-negotiable. Just as you pay your rent or your utilities, pay your growth bill. Get intentional about it. Make a list of topics you want to grow in: leadership, marketing, negotiation, wealth building, communication. Then find resources that feed those areas. Rotate your investments. 1 month a book, the next a course, then a seminar or event. Mix it up, but stay in motion. And remember, it's not about consuming passively. It's about applying what you learn. If you read about negotiation, try the techniques. If you study investing, apply the principle 7 on a small scale. The wealthy don't just know more, they act on what they know. They execute. Over time, you'll look back and realize your thinking has evolved. You'll speak differently, decide differently. People will ask, "How did you become so sharp?" And you'll smile, knowing it came from the quiet discipline of investing in your mind long before the world saw the results. Because the wealth you seek is waiting on the other side of the knowledge you refuse to ignore. Invest there, and everything else begins to shift. I remember the first time I sat down and wrote out a lesson I'd learned about money. Not just thinking about it, not just underlining it in a book, but writing it down in my own words. That moment, something clicked. When you write what you learn, you don't just absorb it, you own it. That's when I began a little practice I've never let go of. I called it my wealth journal. It wasn't fancy, just a notebook. But inside it lived the lessons that changed my financial life. Every day I would ask myself 2 simple questions. What did I learn today about money, business, or mindset? And how can I apply it? Not someday, today, or this week, just one idea a day. That's it. It didn't have to be big. Some days it was as simple as save before I spend. Other days it might have been a profound shift, like realizing that time is a currency and how I use it determines how wealthy I become. But writing it down made it real. It made it stick. You see, people go through life collecting information like pebbles. They carry them in their pockets, and when life shakes them up, the pebbles scatter and disappear. But if you start writing those ideas down, those little gold nuggets of insight, you begin to build something solid. Not a pile of pebbles, but a foundation. A mental framework that guides your decisions, sharpens your focus, and improves your financial instincts. Now, here's why this works. When you write something down, you activate a different part of your brain. It's not just passive learning, it's deliberate thinking. You're not just reading what someone else discovered, you're translating it into your own language. That process builds ownership. And when you follow it up with application, when you ask yourself how to act on it, you're turning insight into income. Most people treat learning like a hobby. The wealthy treat it like a strategy. They connect the dots between knowledge and results. That's what your wealth journal is for. It trains your mind to associate learning with earning. It creates accountability. If you write that you've learned the value of investing early, and then next week you still haven't opened that account, your journal will remind you. It holds up a mirror to your progress. And if you're doing it daily, the compound interest of those entries begins to show. And one more thing. Don't just track successes. Track failures too. Wait. When a mistake costs you money, write it down. Wait. What did I learn? That's a wealth-building question. Regret becomes wisdom when written with a pen. Over time, that journal becomes a record not just of your learning, but of your transformation. It's a map of your journey from surviving to thriving, from unsure to unstoppable. So write your lessons, apply your insights, and let that journal become your private vault full of principles that pay. I remember the first time I sat down and wrote out a lesson I'd learned about money. Not just thinking about it, not just underlining it in a book, but writing it down in my own words. That moment, something clicked. When you write what you learn, you don't just absorb it, you own it. That's when I began a little practice I've never let go of. I called it my wealth journal. It wasn't fancy, just a notebook. But inside it lived the lessons that changed my financial life. Every day, I would ask myself two simple questions. What did I learn today about money, business, or mindset? And how can I apply it? Not someday, today, or this week, just one idea a day. That's it. It didn't have to be big. Some days, it was as simple as save before I spend. Other days, it might have been a profound shift, like realizing the time is a currency and how I use it determines how wealthy I become. But writing it down made it real. It made it stick. You see, people go through life collecting information like pebbles. They carry them in their pockets, and when life shakes them up, the pebbles scatter and disappear. But if you start writing those ideas down, those little gold nuggets of insight, you begin to build something solid, not a pile of pebbles, but a foundation. A mental framework that guides your decisions, sharpens your focus, and improves your financial instincts. Now, here's why this works. When you write something down, you activate a different part of your brain. It's not just passive learning, it's deliberate thinking. You're not just reading what someone else discovered. You're translating it into your own language. That process builds ownership. And when you follow it up with application, when you ask yourself how to act on it, you're turning insight into income. Most people treat learning like a hobby. The wealthy treat it like a strategy. They connect the dots between knowledge and results. That's what your wealth journal is for. It trains your mind to associate learning with earning. It creates accountability. If you write that you've learned the value of investing early, and then next week you still haven't opened that account, your journal will remind you. It holds up a mirror to your progress. And if you're doing it daily, the compound interest of those entries begins to show. And one more thing, don't just track successes. Track failures too. When a mistake cost you money, write it down. Quote, what did I learn? That's a wealth building question. Regret becomes wisdom when written with a pen. Over time, that journal becomes a record not just of your learning, but of your transformation. It's a map of your journey from surviving to thriving, from unsure to unstoppable. So write your lessons, apply your insights, and let that journal become your private vault full of principles that pay. I've often said that failure is not the enemy. In fact, failure is a silent mentor if you're willing to listen. And yet, most people run from it. They hide it, deny it, bury it under excuses. But let me tell you something I learned early in life. Failure ignored is failure repeated. But failure studied, that's tuition well paid. The turning point came for me when I stopped just reacting to my setbacks and started documenting them. I didn't just say, well, that didn't work, and move on, number. I sat down and I asked hard questions. What went wrong? What did I not see? What assumption did I make that cost me? I treated every mistake like an investigation. And just like an investigator, I looked for the root causal, just the symptom. Now here's the truth. Every failure comes with a price tag. But what you get in return depends on whether you cash in the lesson. I remember a time I invested in a business deal that seemed too good to be true. And you know what? It was. I didn't ask enough questions. I got excited instead of doing the math. I lost money, yes, but I gained discernment. I wrote that one down. Don't let emotion override calculation. That single phrase saved me tens of thousands of dollars later on. That one failure paid dividends because I recorded the lesson and corrected the belief. See, behind every mistake is a belief that got you there. I can cut corners. This will fix itself. I'll deal with it later. You have to expose those beliefs. Interrogate them. Because as long as they stay hidden, they will keep steering your decisions silently and expensively. After you've dissected the failure, don't stop there. Go learn from someone who already solved that problem. Read the chapter in the book you skipped. Call the mentor you've been too proud to ask. Find the man or woman who turned that exact kind of failure into a breakthrough and model their correction. That's how you shortcut growth. Not by guessing, but by studying someone else's solution after you've studied your own mistake. The beautiful thing about pain is it gets your attention. The trick is not to waste that attention. Don't just feel it, choose it. Write it, rethink it, then take action. And what you'll find over time is that the failures you feared most often become the foundations of your strength. You stop seeing them as stops and start seeing them as turns, detours that direct you, not destroy you. So don't just survive your failures, mind them. There's gold under the rubble if you're willing to dig. And when you do, that's when loss becomes leverage. That's when the past starts to pay you interest. There's something powerful that happens when you move from guessing to knowing, from saying, I think that might be right, to declaring, I know this is the right move. That kind of certainty doesn't come from luck or even experience alone. It comes from knowledge. And the beauty of knowledge is that it's not reserved for the elite, the privileged, or the lucky. It's available to anyone who decides to pick up a book and read it with purpose. In the early days, I was intimidated by wealth conversations. I'd sit at tables where people discuss stocks, returns, portfolios, leverage, and I'd feel like a foreigner in my own country. I'd nod along, maybe toss in a word or two just to pretend I belonged, but inside I was guessing, and guesswork never leads to wealth. It was in those moments of discomfort that I made a decision. I said to myself, if I want to play in this game, I need to learn the language. So I began to read, slowly, steadily, not with pressure, but with purpose. I read books on finance, business, psychology, and even biographies of those who had made fortunes from nothing. I wasn't trying to memorize, I was trying to understand. And day by day, idea by idea, I started to build something inside me that hadn't existed before. Confidence. The kind of confidence that lets you look someone in the eye and speak with clarity, because you're no longer operating off emotion or hearsay. You've done the work. I want you to know something. Every successful person you admire once sat where you sit now. Unsure, curious, maybe a little intimidated, but they didn't stay there. They read, they learned, they asked questions. And one day, they crossed a bridge. The bridge from maybe to I know. And when you reach that point, execution becomes easy. Confidence becomes your currency. When you walk into a negotiation and you know how money works, how leverage works, how value flows, you carry yourself differently. You don't shrink in the presence of success. You don't apologize for your ambition. You don't ask for permission. You lead the conversation. And the world responds not to timid whispers, but to bold clarity. That clarity is built with bricks of knowledge. You lay one brick each time you read a chapter, each time you solve a problem, each time you write down what you've learned and decide to live by it. Over time, that wall of knowledge becomes your foundation, your safe house, your fortress. So if you want wealth, begin with certainty. Certainty built by learning. Read until you don't doubt. Read until you don't hesitate. Read until wealth stops being a mystery and starts becoming a method. That's when knowledge transforms into confidence. And confidence is what finally turns wisdom into wealth. Most people stay broke not because they lack answers, but because they keep asking the wrong questions. You see, the quality of your life, and especially the quality of your wealth, this determined by the quality of the questions you ask yourself every single day. It's a quiet law that governs achievement. Weak questions invite weak answers. Better questions, though strong, focused, rich in possibility. They open doors where others see only walls. I remember when I was young and frustrated, I used to ask questions like, why can't I ever get ahead? Or why is it so hard to make money? Those questions didn't inspire me, they depressed me. And naturally my answers matched. Because you're not lucky. Because the system is against you. Because rich people have some secret. Those were the answers that came to a weak question. And all they did was justify my stagnation. Then one day, after attending a seminar, I came across a much different kind of question. What problem could I solve that people would gladly pay for? That question flipped a switch in me. It didn't make me a millionaire overnight, but it gave my mind a new job to create, not complain, to seek, not sulk. It was the beginning of a shift. I began asking, what skill could I learn that would make me more valuable? Not, how can I get a raise? But how can I become the kind of person companies fight over? The questions evolved, and the answers followed. How can I turn my story into a lesson that helps others? How can I multiply my income without multiplying my hours? What knowledge is missing in my industry, and how can I be the one to bring it? These questions changed everything. And where did those questions come from? Books, pages, authors who had asked them long before I had and lived the answers. I found that reading didn't just give me answers, it upgraded the questions I was even capable of asking. That's the real power of knowledge. It expands the horizon of your curiosity. You stop thinking like a worker and start thinking like an architect. You stop asking, where's the ladder? And start asking, why don't I build my own building? And here's the secret. When your questions get better, so does your network. So do your opportunities. People are drawn to those who are thinking at a higher level. Your curiosity becomes a magnet. Investors, partners, mentors, they notice when you ask, how do we scale this? Instead of, can I make a quick buck? They hear it in your voice. They see it in your posture. So if you want a richer life, stop demanding easy answers and start demanding better questions. Ask what no one else is asking. Read until your questions evolve from desperate to strategic. Because when you ask the right question, the answer often reveals the path to wealth all by itself. When I first started learning about money, real money, not just how to earn a wage, but how to create value, build assets, and design a future, I kept it all to myself. I studied the books, I listened to the tapes, I took notes, but something was missing. It wasn't until I tried to explain what I was learning to someone else that I truly began to understand it. You see, learning gives you access, but teaching gives you ownership. If you want to cement wealth thinking deep into your mind and spirit, there's no better way than to teach what you've just learned. There's a strange thing that happens when you teach. You realize what you don't know very quickly. It exposes the fog in your thinking, and it forces you to seek clarity. When I started teaching personal development and financial principles, I would go over ideas again and again, not just so I could say them, but so I could say them simply. If it wasn't simple, I hadn't mastered it. And that became my goal. Not just to know, but to explain. Not just to absorb, but to transfer. I remember sharing the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 principle for the first time with a young man who was struggling financially. He was working hard but going nowhere, and I asked him, what do you do with your paycheck? He said, I spend it. I said, that's the problem. Wealth doesn't start with income, it starts with allocation. I explained that if he could live on 70%, save 10%, invest 10%, and give 10%, he'd start to gain control. I drew it out, showed the flow, gave example sand as I was teaching it. It hit me with even greater force than when I had first read it. That's the magic of teaching. It deepens your conviction. Every time you teach, you reaffirm the truth to yourself. Every time you share a principle of wealth with someone else, you become more aligned with that principle internally. And when you speak these ideas out loud, they don't just sit on a page or float in your mind. They take root in your habits. They become part of your identity. So teach your spouse what you just read in that finance book. Explain to your children how money works. Start a blog, record a video, post a short message online, not for fame, but for focus. The act of communicating what you've learned makes you accountable to it. It creates integrity between your knowledge and your actions, and wealth loves integrity. You don't have to be a professional speaker to teach. You just have to care enough to pass on what could help someone else. That's how wealth becomes legacy, not just what you earn, but what you share. Because in teaching, you not only grow others, you grow yourself. I've often said motivation gets you started, but habit keeps you going. It's easy to feel excited after a seminar, inspired after reading a good book, or charged up after listening to a powerful idea. But what happens when the emotion fades, when the day feels long, or when life gets in the way? That's when systems take over. And if you want to stay consistent with learning over the long term, if you want to build not just wealth, but the wisdom to sustain it, you must build a ritual around your growth. Let me tell you something from experience. A man who reads 10 pages a day will outgrow the man who reads 500 pages once a year and forgets most of it. Consistency beats intensity every single time when it comes to personal development. I created a ritual for myself that kept me on track when the days were busy, when the money was tight, or when the motivation was nowhere to be found. I'd read 10 pages every morning, just 10. Sometimes I'd want to read more, but I stayed consistent. I'd take a few notes, highlight what stood out, and write down one key idea that applied to my life or business. At lunchtime, I'd take a few minutes to reflect not just on what I had read, but on how it connected to something I was dealing with. If I was trying to lead better, close a sale, build discipline, I'd ask, what in this morning's reading speaks to that? I made reflection a habit. Then at night, I would do a quick review. Just 5 minutes. I'd scan what I'd read, revisit the insight I had captured, and ask one question: did I apply any of this today? That question created accountability. And accountability, my friend, is where real learning begins. You see, learning doesn't stick because of how inspired you are. It sticks because of how structured you are. The wealthy don't just stumble upon success. They schedule it. They study daily. They write things down. They review what matters. And most importantly, they live what they learn. Their systems become scaffolding for their success. And here's the deeper truth. When you build a ritual around learning, your brain begins to expect growth. You start each day with momentum. You end each day with reflection. You become the kind of person who's not just consuming content, but building character. You're not reacting to life, you're preparing for it. And over time, those 10 pages a day become 10 years of transformation. Wealth is a byproduct of value, and value is built through knowledge applied over time. So don't chase bursts of motivation. Build daily rituals that make learning non-negotiable. Because the person who keeps learning keeps growing, and the person who keeps growing eventually becomes unstoppable.